Hey everybody, so back at the beginning of the season, I looked at the NBC and NBCSN television schedule for October and which NHL games they were showing, and I talked about how lackluster it was and how NBC should be showing much better games than they do, at least for that month looking at it. And I will put a link to that video if you want to watch that, or I'll put it in a card up here somewhere on where it will come across the top of the screen. But I want to look at January now, the NBC, NBCSN TV schedule for January, because I said back at the beginning of the year that it gets better as the season goes on. The matchups at the beginning of the year aren't great. The TV schedule at the beginning of the year isn't great. But as the season goes on, it gets better. So here, I could only fit the first 2 weeks of January on the board because there are so many games NBC and NBCSN are showing. Once football ends, once the NFL regular season ends, NBC can they show so much more hockey. They get hockey on Mondays because there's no more Monday Night Football. They got hockey on some Fridays, some Sunday nights. As the NFL season dwindles down, NBC really picks up their hockey coverage. They show a lot of games just in the first 2 weeks of January here. Well, first 16 days. So the coverage really picks up. There's games on a lot more days. But how about the matchups? Are the matchups any better? There are still some that I look at and I go, why the hell is NBC showing this game? But overall, I do think the matchups are much, much better. And I think the TV schedule overall is much better. And this is just a 2-week, 16-day sample. But I think you'll notice if you go through, if you go to NHL.com, look at the schedule, and go through the January, February, March, the matchups overall are much, much, much better than they are at the beginning of the season. So here's NBC's first 16 days of January. January 1st, obviously, is the Winter Classic, Boston versus Chicago. I don't know why Chicago is in the Winter Classic this year. They suck. They were one of the worst teams last year. They're one of the worst teams again this year. I don't know why they're in the Winter Classic, but they are. So Boston versus Chicago on New Year's Day is the Winter Classic. Then January 2nd is a Wednesday. You have Pittsburgh versus New York Rangers. That's a rivalry game and a good matchup. Then San Jose versus Colorado. That's a great matchup. Then the third, a Thursday night game. You see, Thursday night football is over for the NFL. NBC shows a game on Thursday night. However, this pisses me off. This is the worst matchup out of all of these that I have on the board. Chicago versus the New York Islanders. Why? Why is NBC showing that game? Cross-conference game, zero rivalry between the teams, teams that don't play overly exciting games. Chicago stinks. I'll get into Chicago more later on because, as you'll see, Chicago has 4 NBC games in a 2-week span. It's a joke. I have no idea. It's ridiculous. Get Chicago off of the screen. They suck. Chicago sucks. And it's not like NBC didn't know that they suck because they blew last year too. No one thought Chicago was going to be good this year. Everyone saw what happened last year and we're like, yes, they're a rebuilding team. They're not good anymore. We all knew Chicago was going to suck. Everybody picked Chicago to finish dead last in the Central, which they are. Yet NBC still gives you 4 Chicago games, including the freaking Winter Classic, in a 2-week span. Chicago, 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 Chicago. Stop. I don't want to watch Chicago. At least Chicago versus Nashville is a rivalry. At least that's a rivalry. Chicago versus Pittsburgh is not. Chicago versus Boston is not. Chicago versus the Islanders, those are cross-conference, boring snoozer games. Why is NBC wasting their time with that? You know what I want to see? LA versus San Jose. Nasty California rivalry. Philadelphia versus Washington, division rivalry, teams that hate each other. Montreal versus Boston, the greatest rivalry in the history of sports. Winnipeg versus Minnesota, they played each other in the playoffs last year, huge Central Division rivalry. Boston versus Philadelphia, big, not even in the same division, still a big rivalry. Those are the games that NBC would be showing. And if you look at this, they are showing pretty good games for the most part. But some of them just stand out and don't make sense. Like Chicago. Chicago blows. Stop putting them on national TV. I don't want to watch them. Hawks fans can watch them on their local market. People outside of Chicago don't want to watch the Blackhawks for the most part. We're sick of them. Chicago wasn't a well-liked team when they were winning their Stanley Cups outside of Chicago. They weren't a team that outside fans were like, wow, I really hope Chicago wins this year. Maybe for their first one, because they had been bad for a really long time before that. By the time they got good again and were competing for their first Stanley Cup, I think teams were like, or people were like, all right, it's good to have the Blackhawks good again. By the third one, everyone hated the Blackhawks. They were a boring team to watch. They weren't physical. They kept, they were really, really good, but they weren't a team that a lot of people outside of Chicago loved. Much like Pittsburgh. But stop. I don't understand. You knew the Blackhawks stunk this year. We're going to. They stunk last year, yet you still put them on a ton of NBC games. This is just a 2-week sample. They have 4 games on NBC in 2 weeks. Really? You don't have other teams you can show? Where are the Tampa Bay Lightning? The Tampa Bay Lightning are the best damn team in the league. And where are they on NBC? They don't have a single game on NBC in this whole stretch. They are the best team in the league. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I'll stop ranting about Chicago now. Overall, the schedule isn't bad. Pittsburgh versus New York's a great game. San Jose versus Colorado is great. LA versus San Jose. Winnipeg versus Minnesota. Philly, Washington. Montreal, Boston. Philly, Boston. Those are good games. Those are good games. So the schedule overall is much better. NBC did a much better job as the season went on. And if you go and you look further than this through January into February and March, you'll notice that overall most of the games are good. So I applaud the NHL and NBC for having a much better TV schedule lineup in the second half of the season than they do the first. However, some of these games still just don't make sense. And stop showing the goddamn Chicago Blackhawks. They're not worth watching. They stink. I don't understand it, and I can see that maybe NBC always has shown a ton of Blackhawks games because for most of NBC's recent tenure as the NHL's national TV station, Chicago's been good, so they got used to showing a lot of Chicago games. It's also a massive market, so I understand that. So I can see them getting caught off guard last year because I don't think last season we knew Chicago wasn't the same old Blackhawks from the years prior, but I don't think anyone thought they were going to be this so bad last year. However, heading into this year, we knew Chicago wasn't going to be good given what they looked like last year. They weren't just magically going to get better with all their core players another year older, Keith and Seabrook on the way down, Taves and Kane another year older, limited people around those two. No one thought Chicago was going to be good going into this season. Yet NBC still chooses to play like 20 Chicago games every year. It's dumb, and it pisses me off, because there are much better teams that they could be showing. I can't believe all these games, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 games in 16 days NBC is showing. Tampa Bay doesn't get one of them. Buffalo, not one of them. Nashville, only one. Colorado, only one. Winnipeg, Only one. Those are your best teams. Those are those are the teams that should be getting on NBC every week, that play great matchups and great games, that are the best that the league have to offer. Where are the Toronto Maple Leafs? I know NBC doesn't like to show Canadian teams in the U.S. market for some reason. They seem to think that just because it's a Canadian team that nobody will watch or something. Where the hell's Toronto? One of the most exciting teams in the league. Offensive juggernaut. Nope, no Toronto. No Buffalo, no Tampa Bay. But we get Chicago 4 times, who's dead last in the Central Division. Some of it is just so stupid. It's so stupid. But some of it's also good, and it's certainly better than the beginning of the season was. So NBC's TV schedule does get better, but they're still doing some really stupid shit, like showing Chicago 4 times in 2 weeks. One of the worst teams in the NHL. With that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. Check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.